so much for joining us today for another event of the Holocaust Studies Program at Western Galilee College. My name is Daniela Ozacky Stern, and I am delighted to see so many friends and colleagues here with us. Today, we will delve into the topic of dark legacy, Wehrmacht anti-Semitism in practice and strategy, featuring 4 fascinating lectures from leading scholars, followed by a discussion with the audience if we will have time. I would like to first extend our prayers to the hostages currently held by Hamas, hoping for their safe return home, including our dear friend and Holocaust educator, Alex Danzig. I also want to extend a special thank you to one individual who, since the beginning of the terrible conflict in Israel and the tragic events of October 7th, has been a true support and ambassador for Israel, advocating for the country in its time of need. This person dedicated their time for about 2 months now to raise awareness about the atrocities committed by Hamas and to support Israelis against the wave of anti-Semitism worldwide. This is Verena Boozer, our moderator. Verena, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela, and also a warm welcome from Berlin. As I said, -1 degrees mean that -2 and heavy snowfalls. Yes, and I leave my closing remarks to the end. But let me say that I think this online event today is more than ever crucial and important to clarify the functions and forms that anti-Semitism and hatred of Jews takes against the background of the race of Jew hatred and anti-Semitism worldwide and the distortion of the events on after the attacks by Hamas and its supporters. So now we take a look at the period at National Socialism and the Holocaust. These 4 renowned scholars we have today here will present their research on the broader analytical framework on Wehrmacht anti-Semitism in practice and strategy. Before I introduce now our first distinguished researcher, I would like to ask you to write your questions in the chat so that I can read them out for all of you after. So now it's a real pleasure for me to introduce our first speaker, Dr. George Eisen. George, I will not mention the 4 doctor titles. He is an international recognized author and professor of political science, sports studies, and history. His scholarship includes numerous and diverse books and articles about the Holocaust, sports in society, and other subjects. As he wrote to me, he is the product of 3 educational systems in Hungary, Israel, and the United States. His book, which, by the way, was my first access to the issue on children in the Holocaust, his book, Children and Play in the Holocaust, received the American Library Association's Outstanding Academic Book of the Year, as well as the alternate selection of the Jewish Book Club. His most recent book, A Summer of Mass Murder, 1941, was selected by Knowledge Unleashed for open electronic access. George Eisen served as a keynote speaker and organizer of major international conferences, workshops, and art projects commemorating the Holocaust, as well as other scholarly projects. Fulfilling his commitment to increase international awareness of the tragedy of the Holocaust, he has spoken extensively, and also today, to community and student groups all over the world. In his capacity as Chief International Officer in several universities, he initiated government-sponsored international programs across the globe. He is the recipient of 3 honorary doctorates from leading universities in Hungary, Chile, and the Ukraine. And please, George, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I appreciate all this. I think I have to admit something. When you asked me to present, it was an interesting point because I have a subchapter in the last book about what is the difference. I wrote about Galicia, specifically Hungary, Galicia, and what happened in Galicia, and they were so dramatically different than what happened in other territories in the general government. It was, I call the term the pinball machine syndrome. When I'm writing a book, suddenly different angles coming in that I never planned on that. I am the ball, I'm going side to side, collecting, on introducing, and indeed, the difference never crossed my mind until one reviewer pointed out that how come I don't write about the German military, because in Belarus they killed and did atrocities. Well, in Galicia, it didn't happen. The German army, the Wehrmacht. So I had to address it. The reviewer wrote the book about Belarus and automatically assumed that everywhere else is the same. Well, it wasn't. Not only in Belarus, but in another. Latvia, they started to killing the Jews even before the German army settled down. I mean, we have such a diverse environments, and we need to address that. And I'm so pleased, I appreciate that you called upon me to present that, because indeed, the difference in Galicia was dramatic. Let me put it the first immediate statement. In Galicia, there wasn't Einsatzgruppen. Many people write about it. No, it wasn't. The German military did not participate actively in the destruction of the Jewish communities. The central question, then who was responsible there? I'm addressing it in the book. It was mainly SS stations, stationed in various communities, branching out. They brought over some policemen from even Vienna, augmented, and it was from SS, from the SD, on many of the security organizations. What happened with the Wehrmacht? And that's the important point that we need to figure out. Number one, Galicia was a latecomer in the destructions of Jewish communities. Indeed, it was attached to the general government only in August 1st. There were indeed military units stationed, and in Galicia specifically had an additional angle. The Hungarian state expelled a large number, approximately 25,000 Jews, according to them, lack of citizenship, multi-citizenship, to Galicia. Now, what was interesting is that it created a Hungarian-German conflict. German authorities, the Wehrmacht specifically, requested sending communications upon communications to the Hungarian government to stop to send Hungarians. Hungarians, of course, didn't listen. Indeed, they settled in different communities, but the largest contingent went to Kamenets-Podolsk. It wasn't Galicia, by the way, it's Podolia, Podolsk. It's Podolia on the border. The central message was, we are sending all these Hungarian Jews across the river, that they cannot come back. The communications coming from the headquarters of the main division of the Wehrmacht requested to stop or let them back. The Hungarian government or the military that transported these Jews did not want to hear it. Now, why I am mentioning the Hungarian angle? Because indeed that expedited the mass murder in Galicia. The Kamenets-Podolsk 3 days massacre was the largest massacre until then in the history of the Holocaust or the war. The Holocaust really started at that time. The expediting of the destruction of the Galician communities were not done by the German army. It was done by General Yaron, an SS general that directly reported to Himmler. Had communication with the German military, but directly reported to Himmler. What was different again in Galicia is that immediately Himmler established outposts, security outposts, partly to stop the Hungarian deportation along the border between Galicia and Hungary. Where the German military came in that. Many of the communications mention, interestingly enough, that this influx of people disrupting the supply lines of the German military. What are we talking about supply lines? Many people didn't believe in that, but indeed, one of the immediate problems with this Hungarian expansion was that the German military based the doctrine of the Hunger Plan, which is Hunger Plan, which meant that the German military feeds itself from the location where they are. Now, many of these Hungarians, of course, extra, buying up food. Why we know it so much? Because by August 26th, they forbid them in huge signs to buy anything food-wise. I'm a little bit moving away, of course, but the German army placed on the major cities, the large cities like Kamenets-Podolsk, also German commandant. That's represented the German army. And the commandant, indeed, was the final decision maker. In Kamenets-Podolsk, it's very clearly the commandant established the ghetto, bringing all the Hungarian Jews together. He also established the policies with that. However, the German army, and I'm already disclosing it, the name of the general, Karl von Rock, forbid the German military to participate directly in the mass killing. There's a proviso here. They, however, made a commitment to supply whatever supply they need, bullets, guns, and whatever, to the murder squads. Who were the murder squads? In Galicia, again, as I mentioned, the largest mass murder in communist Poland was 3 days murder from 27, 28, and 29, when 23,600 people were killed. Here comes the Hungarian angle. Why they made this decision to kill such a huge number of people? It came from the German military request to solve the problem of the Hungarian influx. They turned to SS General Yaron, and he indeed, there was a conference in August 25th, in which the decision was made to eliminate. And Yaron wasn't there, but there were 2 military officers from the headquarters of von Rock. And they asked directly to resolve this issue. Yaron made the commitment, and I have the document. And this is the first time I encounter the term Liquidierung, which means liquidating. Germans never used this term. They used a language that it didn't imply. Final solution, it didn't imply. So what was interesting is Yaron specifically pointed out, I will resolve your problem, eliminating Liquidierung, 11,000 Hungarian Jews, specified. The fact that 23,600 were killed, he collected also some Romanian Jews who were pushed by Romanians, local Jews, destroying, killing 23,600. But who was the initiator? That was the German military. And there are some reports indicate that during the massacre, there were German officers watching what's happening. Didn't participate, but watching. Now, as we know, the massacre itself and follow-up massacres, including Babi Yar. Including Babi Yar, the main murderers were, Yaron was involved again, but the main murderers were his combat staff and police battalions. Again, the Einsatzgruppen's role is none. And no military included either. Now, what was holding back the military? It's an interesting question. There was obviously a competition between Himmler and the military establishment. They were independent from each other. Secondly, Karl von Rock stated in his trial in Nuremberg that he did not believe that military should kill civilians just for solving problems. But there is an interesting caveat here, because I have the feeling I very soon have to stop, and I will have a lot to talk, of course. But
you have 7 more minutes.
Oh, thank you. We will figure out what to say then. So what was interesting is the German military really struggled with the supply of food. Its own soldiers. They also relied in Galicia on the local SS establishment to have a freedom of action. They never reported, even within the SS establishment, on the various branches. there were conflicts, including even with during the mass murders, even with the police battalions. Now, the conflict was obviously between Himmler's people, like Fritz Kaufmann, the governor of Galicia, who complained that the German military often saves Jews, protect them, mainly Jews who were working for them, of course. It's in the hundreds, maybe. What was the interesting thing is during the mass murder of Kamenets-Podolsk, one of the assistants to Meisel, the commandant, Meyer, the commandant of the city, when the massacre started, closed 70 Jewish workers, told them not to move, not to go anywhere, saved them. Was it selfish because they were good workers? But Katzmann sent very stern reports to Berlin that the military contracting the mass murder. What happened? There was also conflicts even within the SS establishment, because one of the most fascinating aspects I found in Galicia, the wide range of looting, robbing of the victims. German military never got involved in Galicia. In Belarus, which I read the book of this reviewer, indeed that was the case. Not in Galicia. The conflict in Galicia was between the SS establishment and the German civilian establishment. We're talking about the SS officers or the Kreishauptmann. There were major conflict. Who is getting more loot? The utilitarian motives of for example, in Colombia, which is in Galicia, when the Kreishauptmann advocated that we don't kill the Jews before we taking away their property. The SS officer, first lieutenant, what fascinates me that this SS officer, first lieutenant, could conduct the killing spree of 85,000 people. And he didn't need one bit of the German military. The conflict, for example, Peter Leideritz, and the Kreishauptmann fought over how fast should you kill the Jews. Leideritz says, right now, the Kreishauptmann said, wait, first we have to take away their property. Getting back to the military, I am only talking about 1941 and 42. After the establishment of the death camps, Majdanek and so forth, it wasn't an issue because industrial murder came into. So the German military did not need to intervene in that. Indeed, police battalions were the mainstay of elimination of Jewish communities, collection and sending them on. Finally, just as a summation, the main issue was indeed initiating the destruction, the mass murder, but not participating in it. It's an interesting contradiction here somewhere. I will be more than pleased to discuss some of these issues because I'm sure that you will have some different, especially in the later part of the war. By 1943, many of these SS officers moved back to Germany. The military took over, but by that time, there were no Jews left. And they didn't end up in Auschwitz. They ended up much earlier in the different death camps. I will be happy to entertain any questions. I hope that I am within the framework of our time. I'd love to discuss with you, hear questions on anything that you feel that it's important. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, George. I think we leave the questions to the end because now it's time to introduce our second speaker, who is Dr. David Harrisville. He is an independent scholar specializing in the history of modern Germany, the Third Reich, and the Second World War. He received his PhD in history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2017, where he also served as a lecturer and postdoc fellow. He has held numerous fellowships, including at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Free University in Berlin. He served as visiting assistant professor of history at Furman University from 2018-19 and currently works as a learning designer in the Sheridan Center for Teaching and Learning at Brown University. He has written several articles and book chapters about the Wehrmacht and its crimes, and his book, with the title The Virtuous Wehrmacht, Crafting the Myth of the German Soldier on the Eastern Front, 1941 to 1944, was published in 2021. And now he will speak on anti-Semitism and self-image in the Wehrmacht. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for the invitation to speak today. One second. So I have a few PowerPoint slides to share with you as I talk. So let me share my screen. All right. Can everyone see that image?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And I wrote down my remarks just so I stay within the 20 minutes. So our understanding of the Wehrmacht's relationship to Jews and its role in the Holocaust has evolved greatly over time. For decades after the end of the war, scholars in Germany and abroad, as well as the German public, held on to the myth that the Wehrmacht had been a relatively clean institution. Unlike the SS, it supposedly had not participated in the crimes of the Third Reich. This view has been definitively overturned. Historians have uncovered the army's active and willing participation in atrocities, including the Holocaust, in many regions, and particularly on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht identified Jews, employed Jewish forced labor, provided critical logistical support for SS killing operations, although perhaps not so much in Galicia, and sometimes murdered Jews on its own, often under the cover of anti-partisan operations, while committing sweeping crimes against non-Jewish civilians and Soviet prisoners of war. Thanks to the research of historians Omer Bartov, Wolfram Wette, Bryce Sate, and others, we now know that Nazi ideology, with its emphasis on racial anti-Semitism, had a major impact on the Wehrmacht, from the highest-ranking general to the lowliest private. This ideology was propagated throughout the army through lectures, pamphlets, and training courses, and all soldiers were required to take the infamous oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler. Before they even entered the army, soldiers had typically passed through the Hitler Youth and other Nazi organizations and been subject to Nazi propaganda of all types. Although the question of how Nazi the average German soldier was is still the subject of some debate, it is clear that the Nazi worldview exercised an important influence throughout the army. In addition, soldiers were raised in a society that had been steeped in anti-Semitism for centuries, and while this did not always take genocidal forms, it nevertheless predisposed them toward a negative image of Jews. There is a lot I could talk about today when it comes to the subject of anti-Semitism in the Wehrmacht, from the viewpoints of generals to propaganda, orders and regulations, and specific atrocities that the army participated in. But I'd like to focus on my specialty, which is the perspective of ordinary soldiers on the Eastern Front. And specifically, I'd like to focus on the following questions. What did soldiers think about Jews? What role did anti-Semitism play in their worldviews? How did their perception of Jews compare with their own self-image? And finally, how did they react to atrocities against Jews that they witnessed or committed? To study these questions, I'll rely on published and archival letters and diaries from Wehrmacht soldiers on the Eastern Front, along with secondary sources by scholars such as Michaela Kipp and Felix Römer, who have studied the writings and conversations of ordinary personnel. I should note that the Wehrmacht was an enormous institution comprising some 18 million men, making it very difficult, if not impossible, to generalize about all of their beliefs and experiences. Furthermore, Jews were not a frequent topic of discussion in soldiers' writings, and it is likely that only a minority directly participated in crimes against Jews. Nevertheless, I hope my talk today can at least provide an entryway into understanding the patterns of thought and action or inaction that characterize the men who filled the army's ranks. So today we're essentially going to be sampling the waters of the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, and I do apologize that there will be many anti-Semitic quotations from soldiers. I will argue today that although most soldiers do not appear to have harbored an explicitly genocidal outlook, anti-Semitism ran deep in the Wehrmacht, manifesting in negative stereotypes, as well as perceptions of Jews as a strange and dirty other whose lives were of no major importance and whose deaths were acceptable or even something to be celebrated. This image of the Jew acted as a convenient foil for the self-image of German troops who cultivated identities as clean, hardworking, civilized, and upright men. My final point will be that through their letters, servicemen openly spread information about crimes against Jews by the Wehrmacht and the SS, including mass murder. Perhaps surprisingly, however, they tended not to draw directly upon Nazi ideology or hardcore anti-Semitism to explain these crimes, but emphasized other justifications instead. So as they marched through Eastern Poland and into the Western Soviet Union in the spring and summer of 1941, German soldiers began to comment on the various peoples they encountered. They quickly noted that many areas had a relatively high Jewish population. Quote, Jews run around in great masses. The majority are of the most pure Galician type. All have white armbands with a blue star, wrote Franz Ziebler as his unit waited at the Soviet border. Soldiers found the presence of so many Jews in Eastern Europe unsettling. They described dirty and chaotic people who wore strange clothing and practiced bizarre customs. Quote, the locality has about 16,000 inhabitants, penned one soldier in a letter, of whom 14,000 are Jews, but real Jews, with beards and filthy, to be precise, even worse than they are always described in Der Stürmer. The whole population is contaminated and totally dirty. Elsewhere on the Eastern Front, another soldier wrote, quote, I can't describe to you what the Jewish quarters looks like because you wouldn't believe it. Images of Jews you can see here in the flesh in droves. Dozens and dozens of them, draped in rags, which are mostly in tatters, roam about here. A true German would hardly deign to speak to such a rabble. Even when they describe Jews more positively, as a minority of soldiers seem to have done, they still tended to emphasize how strange they were and how different they were from Germans. According to one private, Harold Hoffman, quote, "One only has to see the faces and forms of these old Jews with their deep-lying eyes and their long beards to feel oneself immediately transported into a world long known in literature. The Jews all speak good German, are hardworking and willing, and must do cleaning work. How foreign everything is." Lieutenant Heinz Rahe likewise said he appreciated the hard work of a Jewish woman who was forced to act as their housekeeper. Yet he could not help noting that, quote, "She has a very Jewish face, one of the unpleasant ones, so that one could easily put a photo of her in Der Stürmer without making any changes. As often as I call her Sarah, she answers Sophie. Like I said, she belongs to the typical Jews' faces and is therefore pretty unsavory to me, but she works in an orderly way." These are some of the most positive descriptions of Jews by Wehrmacht soldiers that I've found in my own research. I should note that historian Wolfram Wette has identified a relatively small number of servicemen who actively oppose the Holocaust or rescue Jews, but this appears to be a tiny minority. Beyond describing Jews as strange and dirty in appearance, soldiers ascribed to them numerous stereotypes that had long been prevalent in German society. Jews, they asserted, were lazy and greedy. They used trickery and deceit to take advantage of their neighbors, amass wealth, and rise to a privileged position. For example, Wilhelm Moldenhauser wrote in his diary that in one town, Jews secretly hoarded eggs in the basement of a synagogue and, quote, "thereby will certainly have done good business each year," implying that they were making an unjust profit. Another soldier opined that, quote, "the Russian people were only regarded as work animals and stood completely under the scourge of Jewry. The population is more than poor. By comparison, one finds in the dwellings of the Jews everything that one desires." Most of these statements might be characterized under the general heading of traditional anti-Semitism. By contrast, expressions of the Nazis' particular brand of eliminationist biological racism tend to be less prevalent in soldiers' writings. Nevertheless, some men did express genocidal intentions that were clearly rooted in Nazi ideology. And let me go to the next slide. Quote, "the deeper we went into Russia," wrote one soldier, "the more frequently we ran into Jews. The chaps are still exactly as impudent as they were in the middle of peacetime. One should really put more of these monsters up against the wall, as we already have," implying that they should be executed. Quote, "the greatest task that is set before us in the fight against Bolshevism," wrote another soldier, "lies in the extermination of the eternal Jew." Beyond such openly genocidal statements, many, perhaps a majority, I would argue, of soldiers appear to have subscribed to the myth that all Jews were communists, just as Nazi officials had constantly repeated. Wilhelm Moldenhauser declared that Ukrainians, quote, "have suffered greatly under Soviet and Jewish rule and were happy about their liberation from communism and Jewry." A non-commissioned officer agreed, stating that the main objective of the war was to, quote, "liberate the world from this plague," and that the German soldier would not leave until, quote, "the root of all evil is ripped out and the headquarters of the Jewish Bolshevik bringers of happiness is destroyed." Others tended to assume that Jews occupied the leading positions in the Soviet Union or that they were prominent in the NKVD or among commissars or partisans. What emerges is a complex picture. Anti-Semitism ran deep in the Wehrmacht and had many different currents, from age-old stereotypes to echoes of the Nazis' racialized worldview. As far as I can tell, and I believe most scholars would agree with me, The average soldier did not harbor explicitly genocidal intentions toward Jews. Nevertheless, he's tended to see Jews at best as an unpleasant, dirty, and strange other, as a people who existed below the German level, as a hindrance to German plans, or even as an enemy, if an ill-defined one. Such attitudes led soldiers to be at the very least, indifferent to the fate of Eastern European Jews, not to protest when harm came to them, and in some cases to celebrate atrocities committed against them. In other words, anti-Semitism did not necessarily make all soldiers into genocidal killers, but it made it difficult for troops to recognize any sense of common humanity with the Jews they encountered, and thus created the conditions within which violence against Jews became imaginable or desired. The image of the dirty, lazy Jew formed an almost perfect contrast to the self-image that German soldiers cultivated for themselves in their writings. And I would suggest that this was no accident. Soldiers portrayed themselves as hardworking, normal in dress and custom, as clean, honest, and orderly, and as representatives of a civilized nation. To his parents and sisters, Hans Wilhelm Sauer described the Soviet Union in typical fashion as a land of, quote, non-culture. Indeed, he wrote, the meanest German soldier seems a high-class, artful, costly, irreplaceable, gracefully built entity next to these simple people who are just as nature made them. The German soldier with his schooling, breeding, and education. Others emphasized the efficiency and professionalism with which they carried out their duty. They also described their not always successful efforts to keep themselves shaved and washed and to tidy up their bunkers or Soviet houses where they quartered. They declared that they were bringing cleanliness, order, and civilization to Eastern Europe. Further, while they labeled Jews as evil, greedy, and selfish, soldiers developed a self-image as honorable men who took care of their comrades as well as their families back home. Quote, and now the Germans are here, and the people can always see for themselves that the Germans are decent, nice guys, wrote Private Wilhelm Moldenhauser to his wife. He and others described sharing food and making sacrifices for their fellow soldiers. They spoke of doing their duty for the future of Germany, a cause more important than themselves. They sent money, flowers, and Christmas cards home to their families and donated to German charities. And as I argue in my book, The Virtuous Wehrmacht, words and gestures like these help solidify the sense that theirs was an upstanding institution and formed the foundations of the myth of the army's clean hands that would persist after the end of the war. So finally, I'd like to turn to the subject of atrocities against Jews that soldiers either witnessed or committed themselves. These included the humiliation of Jews, the use of Jewish forced labor, the ghettoization of Jews, and the beating and murder of Jews, either by the Wehrmacht, the SS, or in some cases, the local inhabitants of the Soviet Union. So what did soldiers write about these things? And how did they justify their actions or their inaction? When they wrote about Jews, soldiers often mentioned that the former were forced to wear the Star of David, were concentrated in ghettos, were expected to show deference to the occupiers, and were employed by the Wehrmacht as forced laborers. A Wehrmacht captain wrote, quote, the whole place swarms with Jews. All are put to work. The girls must wash and patch clothes. The boys clean boots. Since 2 days ago, they all now wear the yellow spot, meaning the Star of David. The 3/4 burned down city is now so clean as it certainly never was before. One commonality in all these reports is the assumption that it was perfectly acceptable and natural for Jews to be humiliated and controlled by Germans. Further, as Michaela Kipp has pointed out, the act of cordoning off Jews in ghettos, identifying them, and forcing them to work for the Wehrmacht was also part of a larger effort by soldiers to enact their fantasy of cleaning up the dirty East and bringing the German values that soldiers supposedly embodied to its allegedly lazy and chaotic inhabitants. German personnel not only described the demeaning treatment of Jews, but also in some cases their mass murder at the hands of the SS or the Wehrmacht, sometimes in surprising detail. And I have many examples I could give, but I'll just give a couple of them. For example, a soldier named Franzel in Army Group South accused Jews of mutilating the corpses of his comrades and murdering Ukrainians and ethnic Germans. Quote, "Yesterday, we and the SS acted mercifully," he wrote, "because each Jew that we nabbed was shot right away. Today, it's different. After viewing the victims, they're beaten to death with clubs and spades. So far, we've dispatched about 1,000 Jews, but that is far too few considering what they've done." Another private wrote of executions committed by the Germans in the wake of acts of sabotage carried out by Soviet resistors. In Kyiv, for example, there is one explosion after the other by means of mines. The city has been burning already for 8 days. The Jews do everything. Thereupon, the Jews from 14 to 60 years old were shot, and the wives of the Jews will also be shot. Otherwise, there will be no end to it. One thing that stands out about soldiers' accounts of mass murder, and which Michaela Kipp has also noted, is that despite the level of indoctrination in the Wehrmacht, soldiers rarely provided explicitly ideological or even explicitly anti-Semitic explanations for the killings. As in the examples I've cited, rather than stating that Jews were killed because they were subhuman or because they were a racial enemy, soldiers tended to prefer more concrete situational rationales. Most commonly, they describe the murders as legitimate responses to atrocities or partisan activity supposedly perpetrated by Jews. This tends to reinforce the conclusion that hardcore Nazi convictions and anti-Jewish hatred were not a necessary prerequisite for violence against Jews. Even so, anti-Semitism in a general sense certainly played a role, as did the assumption that all Jews were Bolsheviks. These ideas predisposed soldiers to think of Jews as an other, as a potential enemy, and to target them for violence whenever the slightest excuse materialized. One final point I'd like to make on this subject is that although few of them could claim truly comprehensive knowledge about its scope, soldiers did indeed write about the Holocaust, as the examples above demonstrate. And they sometimes told their loved ones back home about what they witnessed through their letters. Based on my research and that of other scholars, it appears that somewhere around 1% of all letters written by German troops on the Eastern Front mentioned crimes against Jews. This may seem like a tiny figure, but it is in fact very significant. German soldiers wrote about 10 billion letters home during the war. Given that the majority served on the Eastern Front, a reasonable estimate, and math is not my strong suit, but I would say that perhaps something like 50 million letters home discussed the Holocaust in some form. Parents, wives, and siblings across Germany had access to eyewitness accounts of what was happening to Jews in Eastern Europe from men they found credible and trustworthy. This does not mean that all Germans, soldiers included, had a full and complete knowledge of the Holocaust in the East, but it does suggest that the information was widespread and easily accessible. So in conclusion, I'll just summarize the points that I've made so far regarding anti-Semitism in the Wehrmacht. First, the Wehrmacht was heavily involved in the Holocaust. Second, although few soldiers understood the full magnitude of the final solution, many, if not most of them, knew that Jews were being targeted for abuse and murder in the East. Third, the rank and file generally shared an anti-Semitic outlook. A very small minority objected to crimes against Jews. A larger minority harbored genocidal views shaped by Nazi ideology. The rest were likely not dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semites, but they were anti-Semitic enough to be indifferent or mildly hostile toward Jews to the point where they did not say or do anything to prevent atrocities, and were willing to commit violence against Jews if they felt they had good enough reason. Fourth, the image of Jews as dirty, lazy, dangerous, etc., formed a mirror image to how German soldiers saw themselves. And finally, through their letters home, soldiers kept the home front better informed about violence against Jews than scholars have realized. So I'll end my presentation there. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, David, very much for this amazing lecture. So now we have our third speaker here. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Bastiaan Willems, who is a lecturer in the history of war in the 20th century at Europe at Lancaster University. Dr. Willems completed his master and his PhD in history at the University of Edinburgh and was a research fellow in modern European history at the University College London. After this, he was a Leverhulme Abroad Fellow at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. His first monograph, Violence in Defeat, the Wehrmacht on German Soil, 1944 to 1945, was published with Cambridge University Press in 2021. He is also the co-editor of A Transnational History of Forced Migrants in Europe, Unwilling Nomads in the Age of the Two World Wars, and associate editor of the Journal of Slavic Military Studies. He will speak today about the Wehrmacht's complicity in genocide, East Prussia, 1944-45. And now, Bastiaan, the floor is yours.
Verena, thank you so much, and also thank you for the invitation. It's really great to be talking side by side with George and Yaron and David, whose work I put also in the background. It's really all the praise it gets, it absolutely deserves. In the meantime, I will try to share my screen. I hope that should be coming up now. Can everyone see it? If not, Verena, can you see it, or can someone either say yes or no?
I can see it, yes.
Okay, good. There we go. Oh, yeah, okay, good. Yeah. So first, very briefly, I want to touch on the purpose of this paper. So where am I coming from, and what is it that I feel we should take away from this conversation? So the Allied offensives, they forced, as far as I see it, genocide and repression into the open. And I'm focusing on death marches. I don't think there is, as far as the German people are concerned, you have the letters that David discusses. You have opportunities where they might live fairly close to a concentration camp. But it is in 1944, 1945 that you see these death marches moving through Germany. So one of the most notable examples of public display of late war genocidal violence. Now, by their very nature, like these death marches, they transported concentration camp inmates from camps near the front deeper into Germany. And therefore, by their very nature, they crossed through areas under military control. So what I find interesting, like with this too, or especially the second part taken into account, is that if you look at the military's role in these crimes, I feel it's not really being considered. So if you look at David's research and a great many other excellent works, what tends to happen very often is that examination of the Wehrmacht, it tends to end in 1944, like namely in the Soviet Union, right? So like even though a book might say on the tin 1945, like 1941, 1945, or what have you, very often we tend actually to stop in 1944 because like this, you know, for very obvious reasons, like this is where the massive genocide happens. Now, I'm interested in that in that final year. So what I decided to do is look at the city of Palmniken. Unfortunately, I hope you can all see it. Otherwise, I would ask you to remove the little tab from the side. But you see here the the map of the Königsberg area in what is today Kaliningrad. Now, what happens at Palmniken is the following, and I will be rather brief about it. So Palmniken, this is where a death march ends of about 6,500 Jews, which are coming from 6 of Stutthof concentration camps, subcamps, and they're brought from. They are collected in Königsberg. Like first, they're all brought to Königsberg, and then they are marched to Palmniken, where they were driven onto the ice floes because it is January. Parts of the Baltic Sea are frozen over, and they are killed there. Like this is one of the biggest massacres in the public space in Germany. So we're talking 3,000 Jews, mainly women, die in and around Palmniken, and about 3,500 die on their way to Palmniken. So very large casualty numbers. Now, what stands out, as far as I'm concerned, is a man by the name of Hans Feierabend, who is a very well-respected First World War veteran and who lives in Palmniken. Now, what he says is like, as long as I am alive, the Jews will be fed and none killed. So this is him saying that in the face of an SS unit arriving with this group of 3,000 Jews. Now, what happens? His Volkssturm unit is being sent away a few days after these SS units arrive, and after this, the Jews are massacred. Very shortly thereafter, Hans Feierabend is also found having committed suicide, although the situation surrounding it is very up for debate. Like this might not be suicide, could also just be murder. Now I want to take you back to the previous autumn. Now, what stands out about these subcamps, like 5 out of 6, is that they all served the Luftwaffe. So what I decided to do is I decided to look into that in some more, let's say, obscure units, if you will. I don't think many people will look at the Air Force Fieldworks office like a local. This is not something where you tend to look for these sort of things. So Luftwaffenbauamt. This has been active in East Prussia throughout the war, and we know that early in the war they have been communicating with units just across the border. So, for example, they also tend to pop up when it comes to working in Kaunas, of Jews working in Kaunas and in the borderlands around like Lithuania. So you see them there. But what we also see is that they're still very much active in that final stage of the war. So what we have here is a so-called Forderungsnachweis, and obviously we won't go into that, but you see the great level of detail that is being put in this thing. So this is a document indicating this is being sent to Stutthof concentration camp, for example. So this is the number of Häftlinge, the number of prisoners that we had each and every day. So as you see, there's 27,000 of them working that month. Obviously, that should be divided by 30, and then you get to the daily numbers. And 1,700 working half day. So like very large numbers, but as you also see, it is very carefully checked. Then food is being deducted for it, and this is the amount that is now wired into Stutthof concentration camp bank account, which is in Danzig, the bank account. So, in short, incredibly detailed links here that you see between the Luftwaffe on the one hand and the SS or like Stutthof concentration camp on the other hand. Now, what I find interesting about that, like because this is not necessarily like, I wouldn't say it's well known, but it is something that you could potentially know. I decided to look a little bit more in that Luftwaffenbauamt And what I find where it is located is at the Schleiermacherstraße. So one of the foremost experts on Jews in East Prussia, Professor Rudle-Sirovitz, she indicates that once the Jews are being brought back from these different subcamps and all brought to Königsberg, they were held in different places. The one best known is the Steinfurt Wagonfabrik, but there's also strong evidence to suggest that they were held somewhere else. I think that this Schleiermacherstraße would make for a very likely candidate. Like beyond the fact that we know that the Luftwaffenbauamt is located there, which also means that they are working together with the Rijksarbeidsdienst. We have a source, or this is a source that I came across from just after Königsberg had fallen in April 1945. We have Hugo Link, who was a pastor in Königsberg, and he is himself being brought to this holding pen, if you will. And what he's finding is, and here I quote, he found their dark gray striped pants, patched on the buttocks and knees, a tailcoat vest that was made for such a slim young man that I couldn't button it back when I may have weighed barely more than 100 pounds, and a blue jacket that has been shortened considerably by cutting off the bottom, also already patched in several places. Now, this to me, at least, strikes me as a fairly, I want to say, standard concentration camp outfit, so especially the dark gray striped pants. Also, the fact that it is a very small uniform that he's coming across. Like, obviously, you cannot infer too much from that, but this might indeed be like a women's uniform. So, to me, there's strong evidence to suggest that this place might have been one of those other, let's say, holding pens where Jews were being held. And this, like, obviously, more research would have to be done on that to substantiate that. But it would implicate the Luftwaffenbauamt even more directly than it is already the case. Now, what you have then at this point, you have Luftwaffe units going from their subcamps to Königsberg, and eventually they will then guide them to Palmnicken. Now, how does this process look like? How do they make their way through East Prussia? East Prussia at the time is in the grips of the Soviet offensive. German armies, German divisions are retreating through East Prussia steadily. So this means that Palmnicken at this point is in the so-called area of operation, which in practice in this case means that the military has to be looped in. So it's the military that has the final authority over an area of operations. So I, in my paper, discuss 4 of these institutions. Today I will touch on only 2 of them, the 3rd Panzer Army and the actions of General Toulash, to show indirect and potentially direct involvement. So once again, returning to the previous autumn, like the October 1944, I found documents of the 3rd Panzer Army, and they talk about Jagdkommandos, so hunting commandos, if you will. And this is a quote, like what it says in the documents of 3rd Panzer Army is that what has been established are these commandos, and it's all operations take place in close consultation with the head of Einsatzgruppe B and the commander of the Sicherheitspolizei and SD and the higher SS police leader Nordost, in close collaboration with the BDS Nordost. Now, the 3 men that you named here are Horst Böhme, who's in charge of Einsatzgruppe B. I think this is, by the way, something that flies completely under the radar, the fact that Einsatzgruppen still very much exist in the final stage of the war. Then you have the deputy, higher SS and police leader Nordost, Otto Hellwig, and then the main character in this story, I would say, is the commander of the Sicherheitspolizei, northeast, and that is Kurt Gornig. Now, what you see in this document is not only a clear involvement of the SS, but also the fact that they are operating in East Prussia. So you see that in those in these links, it's very likely that these ideological aspects could very well remain intact. We know for certain, like as we just seen, that there is direct contact with Sturmbannführer Kurt Gornig, the commander of the Sicherheitspolizei, who works out of Königsberg. And this is clearly the person that has so far been mislabeled as Gornig, which is probably why we couldn't find more information about him. This man had a illustrious career of absolute death and destruction. Like before that, he was Befehlshaber der Sicherheitspolizei in Russia and Belarus, so Vice Ruthenian. So this is a man that is deeply familiar with genocidal murder. Now, with whom is he communicating? So, and where are they operating? So, like at this point, and obviously I will spare you the intricacies of the military command structure, but they're operating in a so-called Wehrkreis, like a military district. East Prussia at this time, it's not yet an area operations as such, but it is obviously under the, like the military has a firm grasp of what is happening because it is just behind the front. So who is in charge there? It's a commander by the name of General Otto Lasch. So who later also becomes the commander of Festung Königsberg, and that comes into play shortly. So as district commander, he's constantly in touch with these different SS officers, and he meets Himmler personally in November 1944, for example. There should be no doubt that he's also aware of the war's genocidal aspects. He, for example, is the person credited with the capture of Riga. So his men are the first, together with him personally, to make it into Riga, together with those units in July 1941. Attached to those was also an SS unit that immediately tried to set up a pogrom. So he was very well aware of that. So Lasch, without a hint of a doubt, adheres to the regime's racial mission. Now, as we've also seen in the previous two papers, he's not necessarily openly racist. I have been researching this man for well over a decade. There's very little reason to suggest that he is deeply racist. But on the other hand, he has around him people who are deeply racist. Like one of those, for example, is Günther Ibsen. So at the time that Lasch becomes fortress commander from his previous position as Wehrkreis commander, once he moves to the different office, he brings this Ibsen with him, who is, without a hint of doubt, deeply racist. I want to say, like Lasch here is a project of National Socialist military thinking. Which brings with this idea that anyone, soldier or civilian, killed or adopt an enemy can and must indeed be annihilated. So, having said that, if he thinks about killing Jews, he thinks more of it as a military necessity. So let's talk through those military rationales for a second, as far as he's concerned. So why can't these Jews stay alive in Königsberg? So he's now fortress commander of Königsberg. It is late January 1945. Why are these women not just staying alive? So in case of a siege, because the city is about to be besieged, or there's a fair chance that the city is about to be besieged, these are just simply extra mouths to feed, and during a siege, this is problematic. They are not needed as a workforce. There are 15,000 laborers already available, a lot of them Jews, French, for example. They are in better health, so you already have those. Then there is, of course, as a good German officer, he believes firmly in the stab of the back, which means if you have Jews in your rear as part of the home front, if you will, they could stab you in the back. So it's this deep fear for that. And there's obviously like the proverbial hot potato aspect of it all. Namely, if you are besieged, if your city is being besieged and eventually it is captured, then all of a sudden, also taken at that point, like at the same time that you are being taken prisoner, you now have also 5,000 Jews that you have to explain why they are there. Obviously, they've been mistreated at that point. So now you have 5,000 emaciated Jews to which you have to explain to your Red Army captors. So with all that said in mind, he is making this decision to send them away. So we know that he's involved as a result of a unpublished memoir by Eberhard Ochs, who served in the unit of a deputy SS and police leader Helwig, and who operated the phone, mainly as a connection to General Lasch. To me, Eberhard Ochs, but this is a little bit of a on the side, this is an incredibly interesting person. Like this is a soldier who ends up working for the SS, but he's married to a Jewish woman. Incredibly fascinating life story that I hope to develop somewhere down the line. So what he sees in that office, like a column passes the unit's quarters at the Lietzmannstrasse on the 26th of January, and Ochs witnessed a number of point-blank killings by SS guards. His superior, the deputy HSPF, orders Ochs to check, and he learns that the guards are Belgian. So it's just like, these are not Germans; they are Belgian. So this at least encourages Ochs to make a phone call. So he calls Lasch, and here he gets a confirmation. He says, like, this is a march that has started in Bialystok, and the Jews were to be drowned in the Haff. Well, the Haff is just slightly south of Königsberg, like referred to here as the Friesche Haff. This is by now cut off by Red Army forces. So now a different option is pursued. So now before we move on, to me, what is incredibly interesting about this is that the idea of drowning Jews is apparently one that already exists. So they're eventually going to be killed somewhere else, but the method has already been established at this point, and I just thought it is worthwhile to mention. Now, where do I see Lasch once again involved? Even though the second incident cannot be completely confirmed, I do very strongly believe that we should consider it, and that goes something as follows. So I think it is Lasch who orders Feierabend's Volkssturm unit to move out. So you have Feierabend, who faced with this SS unit with drawn weapons, tells him, get out of the way, offer your support, and Feierabend says, no. As long as I'm here, these Jews are going to be fed. Now, if he's going to be called away, who's going to call him away? Like, if he were to get a phone call from another SS unit, and this is basically the argument that he has in front of these SS men, he says, like, you know, I'm not part of your command structure. Like, I'm not taking orders from you. So if he's already not taking orders from a SS officer in front of him, he's certainly not going to take orders from an SS officer on the phone. So what I think happened is that the SS guards, they would inform, like these SS guards at Palmnicken, they would inform the SD back in Königsberg, who in turn would notify the Fortress Command. And then you have the Fortress Command, who does have authority over Feierabend and does have the authority over the deployment of Volkssturm units, and now says this Volkssturm unit is going to be called away. This is how it eventually plays out, and now you have removed the biggest obstacle. So for a very long time, you have civilians helping Feierabend, but that now German civilians helping Feierabend, keeping Jews alive, but that now falls away. As a matter of fact, it starts to immediately swing the completely different way. You have now civilians like helping the SS, basically within a day of him being removed, they start to help the SS, and then by the end of January, the Palmniken massacre is played out. Now, why do I think that the close involvement of the Wehrmacht has helped us understand or misunderstand the Palmniken massacre for the times that it is? And as a matter of fact, how did it manage to fly under the radar for as long as it did? Well, here obviously we have the military commanders, who, as David also indicates, like they are the ones who opened the debate. They are the first to write about their wartime exploits, and obviously there's no mention of genocide. You have the East Prussian civilians who are also absolutely not interested in a narrative of genocide. So they also keep their mouths closed in that respect. And keeping your mouth closed is something that is deeply military, of course. If you see any given military passport, like some of you might have rifled through some of them, you see that all soldiers will have like a stamp very similar to the one that you see over here, to show that they're taught about on espionage, counter-espionage, treason, and keeping military secrets. Like in other words, keeping a secret is a military virtue, breaching it is punishable. So you know what is expected of you as a soldier, of course. And this is something that doesn't only play in the war. Like this is a military virtue. You bring this with you into the post-war era too. Now, where do I particularly see this? I see this in the behavior of the Major der Reserve, Kurt Diekert. Now, Diekert is the main author of the standard work on the German military in East Prussia in the last year of the war. He writes Der Kampf um Ostpreußen. He also writes General Lasch's memoir as a ghostwriter, if you will. So this man, basically everything that we knew in the 1960s onwards about East Prussia is written by Kurt Diekert. Now, could be, of course, that Kurt Diekert doesn't know anything about the Palmniken massacre. Well, couldn't be further from the truth, because we know, in fact, that in late January 1945, Diekert is ordered to go to Seerappen airfield and form an emergency unit. So the Seerappen airfield is one of those sub-camps. He had a unit of Luftwaffe personnel in the weeks that follow. So in other words, he is there together with the very same people who have been running that camp, and he's in charge of them. After the war, we also know, if you go through Diekert's papers, the book that he writes, Der Kampf von Ostpreußen, you see that he interacts with the SS units to recreate the fighting in East Prussia. So he asks about the deployment. But completely absent from the questions that he asks is anything related to this. He knows very well we're not going to broach this topic. So the same holds true for civilians. Civilians are absolutely not coming forward, but at least they do mention army presence. So here we turn to the work of Charlotte Bartsch. So she writes a book in 1974, Palmniken und sein Bernstein. So Palmniken and its amber, because it used to be a big amber mill there. She says, okay, there are the arrival of refugees, so German refugees she's referring to here, these Prussian refugees on 24 January by a special train, and who were sheltered in schools, manor barns, and the local hotel. The kitchen of the hotel was used as a communal kitchen, while there were 2 further mobile military field kitchens in the village too. The branch of the Palmniken Sparkasse, so like the savings bank, had to be cleared on the 30th of January to make room for Wehrmacht soldiers. So at the very day that these killings take place, in the very week that these killings take place in this tiny village, the Wehrmacht moves into this village en masse. Like we're talking almost a division full of Wehrmacht soldiers that are in or around this very small village at this very moment in time. We know that.
Bas, excuse me, you have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. I will try to do my very best. Okay, so you see, on the 4th of February, you have a main military hospital even being set up. So we know people remain present there. The reason that this is incredibly important is that rumors continue to spread. Bodies keep washing up on the shore for weeks on end. So a lot of German soldiers are there and German civilians are there, but no one broaches that topic afterwards. So it's not only the SS that is present in Palmniken, the Wehrmacht is very present. So what after 1945 the population is left with is the notion that a great crime has taken place in their midst, but that despite a large number of decent soldiers, the massacre could still be carried out. So this also means that drawing attention to this massacre would have placed East Prussia's defenders in a negative light, as such calling into question the German troops' motivations to fight in East Prussia. Now, very briefly then the conclusion. So this paper, what I've tried to do is try to highlight the continued involvement of the Wehrmacht in genocidal crimes as it retreated back onto German soil. The Luftwaffe played in the beginning a very important part in the Death March itself. So it runs the camps and then it transports the Jews from those camps through Königsberg to the coast. And then, in turn, army commands continued to interact with the SS during the war's final months, both directly and indirectly. And once the war is over, the army sanitized this role and framed soldiers in East Prussia merely as staunch defenders. And that's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bas, a lot for your lecture. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our last speaker, my colleague, Dr. Yaron Pasher, who is a member of faculty at Western Galilee College. He teaches history in the Holocaust Studies Program as well as in the departments of interdisciplinary studies and logistics. Dr. Pasher's field of expertise is in comparative history of the Second World War and the Holocaust, integrating also modern Jewish history, strategic thought, and wartime logistics in the 19th and in the 20th century. Dr. Pasher was a fellow at the International Institute for Holocaust Research at Yad Vashem and has held a fellowship with the Claims Conference for several years. His book, Holocaust versus Wehrmacht, How Hitler's Final Solution Undermined the German War Effort, was published with University Press of Kansas in 2015. He's currently working on his second book about Albert Ganzenmüller and the Reichsbahn and co-editing a special volume together with Daniela Ozacky Stern, commemorating 80 years to the German invasions of the USSR, to be published with University Press of Kansas Modern War Studies series in 2024. And now he will speak about D-Day and the extermination of Hungarian Jewry reassessed. Yaron, the floor is yours.
I'll mute myself. Thank you, Verena, very much for this introduction. Thank you, the previous speakers, George, David, and Bastiaan. That was a marvelous, for 3 marvelous presentations. I would like, before I begin, to send my blessings and prayers to Boaz and his sons that are serving at the front in these troubled times. I myself am in Tel Aviv now, so if a siren goes on, because we had a siren of some rocket attacks before, so bear with me for 5 minutes. I'll return and come back. So having said that, I want to start my presentation. The summer of 1944 was another turning point in the chronicles of the World War for the Second World War for two major reasons. The first was the opening of a second front on the European continent by the Allied invasion of Western France. And the second was the final phase of the Jewish deportations by Reichsbahn-owned trains as a systematic means of eliminating European Jews. Transports of Hungarian Jews were conducted intensively in terms of both numbers and time. Meanwhile, dramatic developments were occurring on the Western Front. The Allied invasion of Normandy and the advance of Soviet forces from the east toward the German Reich. The perpetration of the final solution in Hungary, which consisted of the dispatch of some 438,000 Jews to Auschwitz between May 15th and July 1944 aboard some 220 Reichsbahn trains, occurred parallel with the extreme difficulties of renewing supplies via the rail net to German divisions in the West. These transportation problems influenced the outcome of the Allied invasion of Western Europe. Although Germany had 58 divisions in the West, the majority were not mobile, so the infantry divisions and even the panzer units were solely for local use and static defense. The outcome of events that depended on which side would succeed in bringing additional forces to the battlefield. In Normandy, more quickly, Germany or the Allies. The state of the German army during the months between the Battle of Kursk and the spring of 1944 is worthy of a few words. The German invasion of its puppet ally Hungary was a turning point in the fate of the largest Jewish community still living in Europe, which was in a status quo with the authorities of the Hungarian state. They continued to live a relatively regular and safe life despite increasing restrictions on their civil rights and economic possibilities. The Hungarian authorities continued to reject the repeated demands by the Germans to apply the final solution for the living Jews within their borders. Operation Marguerite, the occupation of Hungary, would pave the way for the destruction of almost the entire community in just a few weeks, but would also raise a debate as to whether this action was in German interests. The months from August 1943 until June 1944, from the Battle of Kursk until the landings in Normandy, are occasionally referred to as the forgotten year of the war, or in Soviet literature as the third period of the war, when both forces reached full maturity. By now, both sides were in a stage of attrition with the intention of bringing the clash of titans to a showdown. The German generals were aware of their desperate situation. They continued to ask Hitler for freedom of action so that they could use the vast open spaces of Russian territory to form large-scale tactical maneuvers in hopes of cutting of advancing Soviet armies and demolishing them. Hitler saw this as a pretext for defeatism and a state of mind aimed at overall retreat. As time passed, he became even more fanatical about holding the lines. This meant that increasingly German withdrawals were not integrated into any overall strategy. Rather, they took place suddenly in reaction to a threat of encirclement by Soviet forces. Nevertheless, the German army withstood the reckless assaults of the Soviet, whose repeated frontal attacks caused them to suffer 5 times the losses of their enemy and sometimes even more. Hitler knew that the Americans and the British were committed to an assault on Western Europe. He believed that the German army could defeat an invasion on the beaches. The plan then was to concentrate German forces on the Eastern Front and stem the relentless advance of the German army. Therefore, if the Reich could control its resources, it might still prevail. At the beginning of 1944, there were 825,000 Jews on Hungarian territory, including 100,000 Christian Jews of Jewish origin, who racially were considered Jews, and some 309,000 in areas of Hungary that had annexed between 1938 and 1941. Although Hungary's Jews had suffered from a series of harsh anti-Jewish laws passed since 1938, they had been spared the ravages inflicted on the Jews neighboring Poland and Slovakia. Ironically, it was the attempt of the Hungarian regime to shake off its alliance with Germany and make peace with the Allies that put the Jews of that country in jeopardy. Hitler was infuriated when he learned about the feelers of peace that Miklos Horthy regimes was putting out. In his mind, there was a connection between this perceived treachery and the presence of a large Jewish community in Hungary. On the night of March 18th, 1944, German troops marched into Budapest. The chance to implement the final solution on Hungarian Jewry was now at hand, and consequently, the German supply system based on Reichsbahn's trains was re-burdened. The fate of Hungarian Jews, as well as other remnants of Jewish communities and the efforts to save them as war nearby, it's inevitable, and with the upcoming Allied landings in Europe, would provide the focus for developments and the final solution during the remaining years of the global conflict. These events would be greatly complicated by two closely related aspects of the collapsing Third Reich. The first was the determined advance of the Allies, which was met by equal German determination, not only to hold on so much territory as possible, but also to evacuate to other camps thousands of prisoners still in their hands, most of whom did not survive the journey. The second aspect was the resolve to keep the trains carrying the Jewish transports rolling, regardless of the situation at the front. The issue of logistics is central to understand the military and ideological situation. And the question is, did the transportation and supply problems resulted from deporting Hungarian Jews and their masses to Auschwitz had an effect on the results of the Allied invasion of Western Europe? Transports between May 15th and June 1944. This decision by Hitler made in March 1944 to occupy Germany's puppet ally and institute a pro-Nazi government that would continue the war provided opportunity to deal with Hungary's Jews. However, the actual invasion of Hungary was not driven by the final solution, nor was it an irrational strategic act. The Germans entered Hungary with various rational objectives that meshed with their strategic ones. The primary goal was to keep their untrustworthy ally in the Axis coalition and to ensure the Hungarian armies would remain in the battlefield with the Wehrmacht. In addition, Hungary had attempting reserves of food, fuel, and raw materials, which were essential to the German war effort since it had lost the Ukraine to the Soviets. The Soviet army had almost reconquered the Ukraine and was getting close to the Carpathian Mountains. There were serious concerns among the Nazi perpetrators of the final solution that if they did accelerate the annihilation process, it would be too late and the opportunity of making Europe unify would be lost forever. Thus, until all Nazi Germany's military means and the entire bureaucratic system of the Hungarian state were to be used for this purpose. The German concern for prioritizing the solution to Hungary's Jewish problem was shared by Albert Ganzenmüller, who was then virtually acting as executive director of the Reichsbahn. Ganzenmüller cooperated fully with Eichmann's Sonderkommando, and especially with Franz Nowak, Eichmann's chief transportation expert, by providing the rolling stock needed for the scheduled deportations. The schedule for deporting thousands of Hungarian Jews, as well as route plan, was finalized at a conference in Vienna on May 4th to 6th, 1944, which was attended by representatives of the railroad and the Hungarian police. On April 22nd, Eberhard von Thaden, the German Foreign Office official charged with Jewish affairs and the intermediary between the Foreign Office and the SS, confirmed to Ribbentrop's office that an agreement had been reached with Admiral Horthy on the first installment of Jews to be deported. The trains began moving on May 15th, and arrangements were made to deliver 3,000 Jews daily to Auschwitz. Every effort had been made to avoid disrupting the war effort, and for this reason, it was decided not to deport 50,000 Jews from Budapest in the first wave of forced labor in Germany. The roundup of Jews had to be total. The deportation schedule called for the 4 trains per day, which each train load carrying 3,000 to 3,500 Jews. The wagons used for transporting the Hungarian Jews were all closed freight cars. No passenger cars were used except sometimes for the guards, but even they traveled mostly in closed freight. This procedure was repeated 4 times daily on average, although at times there were 5 transports a day. A broad range of service were offered and adopted to dictate of running trains that stopped only at major distribution centers and not all small stations. Almost a third of all trains ran empty because return cargoes could not always be arranged, despite energetic efforts to do so. Trains carrying mixed freight averaged 39 cars in length with an average load of about 300 tons. The exact amount of tonnage was carried by the same trains when they were deporting Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz. Coal trains were about 40 cars long and carried about 800 tons. Most freight trains traveled at about 50 kilometers per hour. The SS administration of Auschwitz was well prepared for anticipated arrival of 12,000 to 14,000 Jews from Hungary daily. Comparing these numbers to the military forces results in a rather distorted picture of German priorities. Instead of transporting 2 or 3 divisions daily from the Eastern Front to the Western sector, which was at that time relatively quite quiet, which almost all the German High Command agreed would be invaded sooner or later that year, every day, Germany brought 2 or 3 divisions worth of deportees to the platform at Birkenau instead. Had this activity anything to do with increasing the odds of repulsing an upcoming military invasion of Western Europe by the Allies, there is every reason to believe that logistically such an operation, which was even bigger than Operation Overlord, the D-Day events, in terms of mobilizing personnel, would have been rational. However, nothing concerned with the Hungarian tragedy even came close to sound military strategy or logistics. The first trains were packed to capacity, and von Taden reported that 116,000 Jews were deported in 9 days. Every day they were loaded onto 4 trains of 45 boxcars, which meant there were more than 65 passengers per wagon. When Eichmann was negotiating over his scheme with Dr. Rudolf Kastner for facilitating the departure of Jews out of Hungary, he explained that if 90 people were sometimes loaded into one wagon, it was because Ruthenian Jews had plenty of children who took up very little room. Quote, besides, the Jews of those regions were not pretentious. The longest transport route ran from France to Russia and was over 4,000 kilometers long. As of 1943 and through Operation Citadelle, the upcoming Battle of Kursk, Operation Margaret, and the Ardennes Offensive in December 1944, the troop transports comprised trains of 49 to 53 wagons, depending on the type of locomotives that pulled them. This was approximately the amount of wagons used for the Hungarian deportations by the SS, which was around 45. While the Hungarians were busy with the technical organization details of the deportations, the Germans were settling the problem of transportation, including the acquisition of freight cars and determining the route. Because of the high priority attached to building the aircraft factory and other military-related projects in which able-bodied Jews were to be employed, the Wehrmacht was cooperative in releasing the rolling stock demanded by the SS. The single-mindedness with which the Nazi leaders pursued their objectives of the final solution seemed overrid even the military requirements of the Third Reich. They continued to attach greater priority to the deportation of the Jews and to the transportation needs of the Wehrmacht, even when the Soviet troops were rapidly approaching the Carpathians. By June 7th, some 289,000 Jews were deported aboard 92 trains of 45 wagons each, with a daily capacity of up to 14,000 deportees. In 1944, Reichsbahn passenger traffic rose steadily, reaching a peak of 3.7 billion people in total. Still, this had nothing to do with the fact that the trains used for Jewish deportations were part of the operational apparatus of the rail net that served the Wehrmacht in parallel with serving the German population in general. Because in 1944 there was an increase in freight traffic, as well as difficulties caused by developments on the fronts and air attacks on the railways, the total number of trains used daily had no real impact on the perception that the final solution transports were a drop in the ocean compared to the enormous amount of traffic the Reichsbahn operated daily. A German army group was formed from a number of armies that were under the command of a field marshal. As a result of the circumstances, there was a major difference between the number of men that comprised each group, 250,000 to more than 1 million, to more than 1 million, but such a force could hold an entire front. Each German army usually numbered from 40,000 to 100,000 troops. A Panzer division had approximately 65 tanks. One could assume then that until June 7th, the number of Hungarian Jewish deportees traveling on board the trains was equivalent to that of an army group. On the basis of the capacity of a troop transportation, 750 men per train, the amount of train used for those 92 deportations could have borne some 207,000 German troops to Western Europe. These could have reinforced the so-called Atlantic Wall built by General Erwin Rommel and even driven a potential Allied invasion into the sea. The rail facilities that served the Wehrmacht were the same ones used by the SS for its Jewish transport needs, some of which were freight wagons. The only benefit from the SS transport was that a substantial part of the booty from the Jewish deportees was immediately distributed among combat divisions. Waffen-SS Division, Das Reich, and Totenkopf each received 500 wristwatches as well as 300 fountain pens. U-boat fighters received 3,000 watches and 2,000 pens. Strategically, these benefits meant little except as bribes to the army to remain patient with the SS Jewish enterprise. However, in the long run, the cost was much higher. When Operation Overlord started, the D-Day invasion, no single factor in itself assured victory for the American and British forces. The tactical and strategic bombing campaigns played an important role, but the transportation plan had only limited success. German coastal defenses were not seriously damaged by the aerial attacks that preceded the landings on D-Day. Germany enjoyed no superiority other than abilities of fighting men and quality of its equipment, but the Allies had no overwhelming advantages with respect to their men or equipment. As regard to the Western Rail Net, from mid-May 1944 until the day of the invasion on June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied planes dropped over 76,000 tons of bombs on the French railway system. This was about 7 times the amount of explosive materials dropped on Hiroshima. The result was devastating for the bridges over the River Seine in Western Paris. Railway traffic was reduced from 69 trains in mid-May to 38 on the day of the invasion. On June 3rd, 1944, the intelligence department of the Allied High Command reported that the German-controlled rail net absorbed and continued to absorb an attack that no transportation system in the world had ever known, either in strength or length. About 1,700 locomotives and 25,000 rail wagons were demolished and thus put out of service. Now, although these numbers seem impressive, they were only 8 to 13% of the railway layout before the air bombing. Now, I want to show you a map here. This is, of course, the 5 landing beaches. But this is an interesting map. What you see here is a railway map from the German army. That
I think you, Yaron, you have to click the map because we don't see it.
You don't see the map?
No.
Okay, so I'll get. Can you see this map? This is better.
No, we only see.
Okay, so I'll leave the map. What I want to show you is a map, an Eisen Bankarte. We'll leave the technique. We're running out of time. Most of the air bombardments by the Allies were done on the northern part of France. In other words, the area around Paris. What we see in the map that technically I can't show you now is that the area around Normandy has almost no bombardments, which comes to show us that the railway lines to the front, in other words, to bring new divisions from the Eastern Front to the Western Front in Normandy, were available. And there's a reason for that, because the Allies are leaving the railway lines not bombed in that area in order for them to be able to use them later on. Let me continue. The shortages of material reinforce the effects of reduced troop strengths. Forces at the front required 1,000 tons of munitions daily, 100,000 tons of fuel, and 250 tons of supplies per day, needs that were satisfied for a time from the depots established before D-Day. On June 6, 1944, the German armies had a 60-day supply of rations, and the Panzer divisions had enough fuel to travel 483 kilometers. Supplying the troops with adequate provisions required 36 trains per day. However, only 9 were able to reach the Seine-Loire Triangle daily between June 10th and August 11th. In the northeast area of the triangle, through which 98% of the military traffic passed, the volume of trains entered dropping in May by 50% compared to January, February. It rose again to 80% of this level in the last 3 weeks of June, but then fell steeply to 39% in July. And the Seine
Yaron, you have 1 more minute.
Okay, so I'll begin to conclude. The fact remains that before the landing in Normandy on June 6, the Germans were suffering from several fuel and transport difficulties throughout Europe. However, it was not the paralysis of the French railway and road network that isolated the Wehrmacht completely at the front after June 6. Despite round-the-clock air attacks from heavy and medium fighter bombs, augmented by the sabotage of rail and cable communication by guerrillas, results were not absolute. Air attacks rarely destroyed bridges. Trains continued to run, albeit with extreme difficulty, and marching columns to filter the night. Only in northern France was the rail net close to utter paralysis, with the Paris area suffering extensive damage. By June 4th, every railroad bridge across the Seine between One and Paris had been knocked out. The Germans managed to move a total of 58 divisions into France during the spring of 1944, despite the success of the Allied air bombing in the French railway. 1 minute and I'm finished. Now, the question is Normandy of Upper Silesia, okay? Only 1 day after the landings in Normandy, the Germans completed the first phase of the Hungarian deportation plan, when the last train from Ruthenia and Transylvania reached Auschwitz. This brought the number of Hungarian Jews deported parallel to the perpetrators for the Allies' landings to a total of 289,357 Jews. Most of them were removed in just 23 days. In logistical terms, if we translate it into 145 trains that were used to the deportation of Jews instead of transporting at least 7 divisions of infantry or panzers that could have been used for the layout in the West in order to help repulse the imminent enemy invasion. One last sentence. Okay. Despite German difficulties in bringing up their forces, the Americans had not abandoned the notion of a powerful counteroffensive. Wherever a pair of Allied armies joined up, a weak point was created that the Germans could easily exploit to their advantage. This only strengthens the argument that had the Germans acted more swiftly in bringing more reserves to the Normandy sector, a feasible move despite the problems with the damaged railway system, the Allied landings might have been repulsed and the confrontation between the armies restricted to the beaches, as Rommel had hoped. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Yaron. And thank you to all the four speakers. I start to read out. We have only 2 questions, I think. I start with the first question, which is from Mr. Umo. I think it's to George, but maybe also the others can add something or want to add something. So the question is, the Wehrmacht was made up of the Heer, the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe. How did each other act independently in the various military-related activities that pointed to war crimes at war's end?
Would you mind to repeat it a little bit slower? I lost something there.
Okay, I read it again. Wehrmacht, was subdivided into the Heer, the army, the Kriegsmarine,
yes,
and the Luftwaffe. How did each other act independently in the various military-related activities that pointed to war crimes at the war's end?
Number 1, the military administration in the south, specifically, it's included also Galicia. It was limited specifically because on the right side was Romania, and Romanians indeed controlled fully all the way to Odessa. On the south and west was the Hungarians, and there were conflict between the Hungarians and the Germans. It was specifically the German High Command in the south, specifically von Rock, was desperate for food supply. They weren't interested to eliminate or destroy the Jewish community, except eliminate and destroy the Jewish community, that they will not use the food supply. It wasn't so much anti-Semitism, it's a practical matter. I use the term here as a matter of fact, that it's, I took a note on that, it was a very utilitarian decision on their part to destroy, not specifically the 1941, the local Jews. 1941, the Hungarian Jews were deported, flew over the border between Hungary and Galicia. It doesn't mean that there were no anti-Semitic sentiments, because they, in the first stage, indeed fomented anti-Jewish activities among the Ukrainians. Sometimes the Hungarian military stopped it. So there was a conflict, and there was also a conflict in the Romanian and the German command. It's a complex, it was a very typical border region, changing constantly. There were Poles killing Ukrainians, Ukrainians killing Poles, everybody killing Jews, but also Ukrainians killing Ukrainians. I hope I answered the question.
I could potentially like build on that too. Obviously, like the focus on the war's end. It's like I think important, obviously, to keep in mind, and like George is also like referring to, is like the main business of the Wehrmacht is not necessarily killing Jews. It's like winning the war, right? Like this, like the SS is tasked with killing Jews. Like you have specific ministries that that go and exploit like the occupied areas, obviously, and then you have the SS that is tasked with the genocidal aspect of it. The Wehrmacht obviously takes very active part in it, but it's not its main occupation, of course, right? So
yeah.
This doesn't obviously, like as I hope my paper also showed, that doesn't mean that they're not involved in it. It is a fact they're very actively involved in it. But if you break it down at individual parts, like in the Heer, the Kriegsmarine, and the Luftwaffe, like the Luftwaffe basically doesn't operate anymore in the final months of the war. If you see like the number of planes that oppose the different like the Royal Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, and the Red Army Air Force. These are their priorities. Like, can we, can we find enough fuel or this sort of things? Like, what do we do once a military administration of our local Luftwaffe chapter breaks down? Like in my case, it's like Luftflotte 6. So like what happens to that if like in East Prussia, this has to be transformed. So like these are the priorities. So like when it comes to here, it's like, okay, like what do we do if we have to retreat? Like the same is true with a Kriegsmarine, for example. Like when do they need Jews? Like very actively. Like if a ship needs to be built, we have the Kriegsmarine asking Stutthof concentration camp. Like, can you send over like sometimes 600, but I've seen also like number like 15,000 Jews that we need to build our ships. So I think, like always, to me at least, I keep in mind that the Wehrmacht's main preoccupation is never killing Jews, even though, like, obviously they play a central role in it. But it's not why they are at the front, or that this is not why they are in the Soviet Union in the first place. So I always feel it is important to keep in mind, like what is the army doing, and the army is either defending or this is attacking. And if indeed, like it's also like Yaron indicates, like sometimes there's like deep friction between that, obviously. But like at the end of the day, it's the army's task to fight, like either attack or defend.
Okay, so any more comments to this? If not, then I go further with the second questions by Mr. Foster. I think that it's a question to David, but is it possible to assess whether the majority of soldiers who murdered Jews, allegedly as partisans, believed that explanation to be true, or rather knew it to be objectively false, but used it as a way to preserve their self-image as honorable and civilized?
Yeah, well, thank you for this question. This is a really good question, and it's something that I've personally wondered about myself. Unfortunately, usually when soldiers write about these things, the letters are relatively short, and you might get one sentence or maybe two sentences. Even in a diary, it's usually a very short description. So I haven't been able to really get a solid answer to the question of whether they thought that the Jews that were being killed were actual partisans or not. And, I have my suspicions, if they're killing women and children, and if they're personally, they've been in the area for a while, they know the situation, they could perhaps tell the difference between, armed partisans and innocent civilians who are being killed for no reason. So there might have been, soldiers who certainly knew that these weren't actual partisans or actual resistors. At the same time, I found that soldiers had enormous powers of self-deception and enormous powers of rationalization, and they told themselves all sorts of things that may not have been true and really tried to convince themselves that they were good and honorable, and everything they were doing was necessary for winning the war. So I honestly don't have a good answer to the question. I think I'll have to do more reading, and you'd need to study many more soldiers to get a really good sense of that. But I suspect there were some who knew perfectly well that these people were innocent, and others who perhaps were better at sort of persuading themselves that they were actually criminals. But it really goes to show that they told themselves particular stories about what was happening and told their relatives back home these stories, and perhaps came to believe them, even if some part of them knew that they weren't actually true. But that's a really excellent question.
Yeah, if I could I build on that, Verena?
Yeah, sure.
Like one of the things that I find very interesting is if you look at these like military documents, and it's like we have been in combat with partisans for 3 months or something like that, right? And then you say like, and in this village we found one shotgun, or like one axe, and in the course of these 3 months our unit has suffered 3 casualties, like 2 dead and 1 wounded. Like, so at that point you sort of have to go like, yeah, like we are not like killing like partisans. So obviously, like indeed, like that sense of self-deception is like incredibly important. And I also see obviously like Leonid Reinier in the audience. Like like I don't think it's more true than it is in Belarusia, where you just send people into a swamp, and you come back and you have you find people who have just been hiding in the Pripyat marshes or something, and that like you have been told that where the partisan is the Jew and where is the Jew is the partisan, right? Like that is the narrative that exists. But once you have killed all Jews in the area, you'll find that there is no partisan. There is like only one like rusty shotgun, and only women and children. So yes, like that self-deception is like it's incredibly important. Yes, and like once again, like I think your work does actually a very good job. If you're saying like I haven't really figured it out, I think you're selling yourself short, David. I thought it was really good work that you did.
Thanks. And I'll add that I've seen similar documents where the Wehrmacht talks about a successful anti-partisan operation where they kill 300 partisans and 1 German soldier is wounded, and you have to wonder if these people were actually if they were actually fighting anyone, or if it was just innocent civilians.
Yes, I think this answered already the last question by Mr. Kirchhubel, was if they mentioned in these letters what the Wehrmacht troops did or saw, or were descriptions in these letters kept vague. I think you answered this already, David.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the soldiers. There are some soldiers who are pretty indirect, and they just generally mention that Jews are disappearing, or bad things are happening, or they've heard rumors. But I've also seen very, very specific descriptions and numbers of how many Jews were killed, and very direct eyewitness accounts. What you tend not to see so much are soldiers personally saying they took part. Usually they say like their comrades did this, or they saw the SS do this. But sometimes they do get very specific. Although you don't necessarily always know the location where they're at, for example.
Okay, we have a last question, yes, and then we have to close.
Yes, I dare to answer to Bastiaan Willems. You are totally abstracting from the transaction costs of order giving in war. There must be something to reduce the costs of war, reduce the costs of collective action. And tragically, killing the Jewish victim, this is the instrument by which NSDAP came to power. And this is the instrument that is actually upholding the war. That means that the brainwash, the homogenization of views, and the efficacy of ordering had been causally related, as I think, to killing the Jewish victim. That is, it is not that the soldiers' role is to win the battle. They would not have won the battle without these perverts' fuel. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah,
yes,
I mean,
thank you, Mrs.
I mean, like,
Doctor, again, postdoctor.
Like,
yes.
I'm afraid I don't necessarily agree with it. Like, obviously, I completely get what you're getting at. But if you're looking at the, let's say, millions of orders that exist, given to German soldiers, and you compare that to the number of orders that we have, pointing to orders pertaining to genocide, it is already like a fraction. And obviously, you say, like, it is true anti-Semitism that the Nazi Party comes to power. I hope that most of us also know that, especially in the early 1930s, a lot of efforts are actually being made to keep anti-Semitism from the political platform. Like this, this serves very much very minor purpose when you have to get from your small group of voters to the millions. Again, and as we also quite famously know, I want to say, if you look at the research of Omar Bartov, who finds that there are a lot of Communist Party of Germany and Socialist Party of Germany members also like moving into the Soviet Union. If we obviously see the famous work of Browning, who also finds that these are not hardcore anti-Semites at all. Like, obviously, I see the point that you're making, but I'm not finding myself in agreement.
Okay, but maybe we have to come to a close now, and I would say in 2 minutes something which leads me. Maybe it's a good conclusion remark now at the end, because while listening to all of your lectures today, I really got the impression that parts of humanity have not evolved at all since then, or even the times before National Socialism and the Holocaust, because all these anti-Semitic types, or the lies, or the prejudices still have a strong impact today. And many of these individual aspects that led to the genocide of the European Jews back then still exist today. And when you say, Bastiaan, I don't necessarily agree, or maybe others, and the works by Christopher Browning and Omar Bartov and so on, I will tell you a story from Saturday here in Berlin, because I ran in a pro-Palestinian demonstration with people of heterogeneous backgrounds. You had the BDS supporters, you had people who shouted Allah Akbar, the Islamists, you had the queers for Palestine, totally different backgrounds. But what did they have in common? It was against Israel and against the Jews. And I asked the people, the queers for Palestine, what do they mean with free Palestine? And they took out of their bag old stereotypes and explained to me that Jews had poisoned the water in Gaza. And this is an old middle-aged narrative. And so I'm not really sure if it's only winning the war, because I think sometimes it's not mutually exclusive. You have to have something which puts everything together, like on this one demonstration, which was in my neighborhood last week. But anyway, we have to close now. And yeah, I hope that we will see soon again, when maybe times are better than in January. Our next online event is against the background of the Day of Remembrance for the Victims of the Holocaust on 27th of January. Our online event will deal with the genocide on the European Roma. It will take place on the 18th of January. And so I see Boaz is again with us. Do you want to say something from the front line? We can't hear you. We see that you speak, but we can't hear you.
I'm in the back of the front line. It's not that I'm running around with a knife in my teeth. And I think I understand what Bas is saying. I mean, we are not military people, so we don't understand how many orders there are in an army. There are so many orders. I'm seeing this because I sit in the brigade HQ. I see this. I'm in charge of, I'm one of the operations people. This is very obvious, but it's not a matter, I'm paraphrasing this, but that's not something just to color it. It's not by kilo. Some orders are more instructive to us than others. And generally, I disagree with Browning, and I think my soldier said rightly that he never saw a military unit, how it works, because it doesn't work out the way he was talking about it, and they were not a real military unit anyway. So there's a lot of, I think, generally, this subject is not going away. The question of anti-Semitism in the Wehrmacht, the fact that we could bring 4 speakers to talk about something that was told to us was not that important. Maybe today, especially today, we understand the importance of this subject again. And understanding the importance of seeing anti-Semitism where it exists and not brushing it aside or putting it in a minor role. At least I think for us, looking at the events of the 7th, suddenly all fits together. And I think some of the arguments, and this is something I would say, put out by Omer Bertov and Browning, which are historians which are much bigger than me and my young emerging colleagues. They are actually arguing with us on this issue we have now. Is anti-Semitism a major force, enabling people to behead children and to burn them and to whatever? Is this a major driving force, or is this something on the fringes of the system? And the same argument we have with Browning on 101 Battalion is the same argument we have today about the Hamas. And I think it's not an accident that we see, again, my belief is, and I'm not talking anything derogatory about big historians, the fact that we are seeing the centrality of anti-Semitism and people like Bertov and Browning are missing it, maybe relates to the whole historical approach they have, and at least with some people it relates to other subjects. So I will stop here. We postponed this event from the original date. We postponed this event, and we didn't know how we will do it. As Verena and even myself and others were fighting for the good cause. In the last month, we understood that this issue is central again, and this is not a luxury, having an academic seminar about German army's anti-Semitism. It is very relevant. And I want to thank again the organizers, Verena, Daniela, to thank the speakers who did amazing, gave us amazing lectures, and to say that we have not yet finished this issue. We'll probably talk about this more. Thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you to the speakers, and we'll see you next month. Hopefully, maybe we'll have a resolving of the situation here by there, although I am not committing to this. Personally, I'm passive, whatever will happen. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Boaz. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye, Yaron. And
Bye-bye.
Daniela, is she still here?
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank
Boaz,
you.
let's try to, like, it is my deep wish, Boaz, that, you know, one day soon, as soon as possible, we can have an in-person spirited conversation about these very topics, because you're very, very right. These are incredibly important, and we should continue to have these conversations. So let's make it our mission to see each other in person.
I'm supposed to be in the UK on June for a Society of Children's History conference, and we'll have a few days. So,
oh, that would be excellent. Good.
So let's be in touch.
Please, please let me know, Boaz.
And whoever is coming to Israel first is really invited to come visit us in the Western Galilee. We will show you a good time. Hopefully that we will be able. Anyway, so goodbye, everyone. Good night.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Also, goodbye,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you so much,
Goodbye.
Verena, once again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.